The past is filled with darkness, mystery, and things that defy explanation. We're drawn to these stories, not to be spooked, but to understand what they reveal about us.
But sometimes the truth is weirder and creepier than fiction.
This is Down the Rabbit Hole, Weird History. I'm Rose Smith.
And I'm Jacob Wesson.
Join us as we explore the unsettling moments when human behavior pushes the boundaries of belief.
Let's dive in.
Tonight, we're going to take apart a catastrophe that doesn't look like a single event until you see the scale. The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom and the civil war it triggered in mid-19th century China.
I know the name, but it always sounds like a lost fantasy novel. Heavenly Kingdom feels like marketing.
That's a useful instinct. It was marketing, theology, and state building fused into one movement, and it produced one of the deadliest conflicts in human history.
I've heard tens of millions, and I always assume that's exaggeration.
It's not a clean number because records and chaos distort counts, but tens of millions is the right order of magnitude. The unsettling part is how a civil war gets that lethal without modern industry.
Okay, start at the beginning. Who starts this?
Hong Xiuquan. He's from Guangdong, and he's born into a society where the imperial examination system is the gateway to status.
The exams that decide whether you're somebody.
Exactly. And repeated failure can mean lifelong exclusion. That pressure can make radical explanations feel reasonable.
That sounds like a powder keg for a charismatic leader.
It can be. Hong fails the exams multiple times, has a breakdown, and later interprets his visions through a strange lens, Christian tracts and missionary influence that had begun circulating.
That's the famous weird fact, right? He claims he's related to Jesus.
Yes, he eventually claims he's Jesus's younger brother, sent to purge demons and reform the world.
Younger brother. I always mix that up and think he said older brother.
Younger. And that detail matters because it's not just I'm holy, it's I'm family, a claim to inherited authority in a culture that understands lineage.
So he's taking a foreign religion, filtering it through Chinese hierarchy, and building a political claim on top.
Exactly. And it doesn't stay private. He helps form a God worshippers movement that offers moral clarity and community in a period of deep social stress.
What kind of stress are we talking about?
Population pressure and land scarcity, corruption, fiscal strain, and a Qing state battered by external shocks and treaty concessions. Many people feel the old order is failing.
So people are primed to believe someone when they say, the world is broken and I have the cure.
Precisely. The Taiping message framed the Qing rulers as illegitimate and demonic, and the Taiping as the righteous alternative.
That's how you turn political grievance into religious certainty.
Yes, and when you say God commands it, you turn compromise into betrayal.
Which makes the conflict existential.
Exactly. Existential conflicts escalate because the goal isn't reform. The goal is annihilation of the enemy's legitimacy.
How does this go from one charismatic guy to a full-blown rival state?
Through organization and opportunity, the Taiping create discipline, rules, and military structure. They move into areas where local grievances make recruitment possible.
So it's not just faith, it's logistics.
It's always logistics. Belief still needs food, weapons, leadership, and a narrative that holds under hardship.
What does the Qing do at first? Do they take it seriously?
Early on, it can look like one rebellion among many, but it aims to replace the dynasty, not bargain with it.
So the pivot is when they start taking real cities.
Yes, when they begin capturing major cities and holding territory like a state. The most symbolic moment is when they take Nanjing and turn it into a rival capital.
That's the rival capital at Nanjing fact. So they're planting a flag on the map.
They call it Tianjing, heavenly capital. That's a declaration. We are the center now.
Which forces the Qing into a different kind of war.
Exactly. Once a movement holds a capital, it becomes a governing problem. Taxation, administration, law, food supply, ideology.
And that's where the Taiping get even stranger.
They do. Next, we'll lay out what those radical social rules were, why they appealed to some people, and why they planted contradictions that later helped destroy the movement from within. When the Taiping seize Nanjing in 1853 and declare it their capital, they shift from insurgency to a competing state.
That's such a bold move. It's like saying, we're not here to protest, we're here to govern.
Exactly, and governing forces you to turn slogans into systems. This is where one of the weird anchor facts becomes crucial. Social rules were radically rewritten.
Give me the headline version. What changes under Taiping rule?
The movement promoted a kind of Puritan moral order, bans on opium, alcohol, gambling, and prostitution. It attempted to reshape family life, gender roles, and property arrangements in ways that were disruptive to local elites.
That sounds like social reform mixed with religious control.
It is both. The Taiping also tried to enforce strict separation of men and women in many contexts, including within military and civilian life, which created practical contradictions.
Contradictions like you need families and normal labor patterns to run a city?
Exactly. Another major reform was attacking the Confucian ideological foundation of Qing legitimacy. They replaced traditional texts with their own religious framework, which created a direct clash with the scholar official class.
So they're not just fighting the Qing army, they're fighting the cultural operating system.
Yes, that's part of why the war becomes so total. If you're a local elite whose status depends on Confucian norms, the Taiping are not a negotiable threat, they're an existential threat.
But clearly they recruited a lot of people. Why would ordinary villagers join?
Several reasons. First, grievance. Land pressure and inequality meant many were already desperate. Second, security. In a chaotic era, a disciplined movement can feel safer than banditry and corrupt local officials.
And third, belief. If you're convinced this is a divine mission, you'll tolerate extreme hardship.
Exactly. And belief can be reinforced by rules that signal seriousness. When a movement bans opium and corruption, it can look morally superior to the old order, even if enforcement is brutal.
That even if is doing a lot of work.
It is. Because Taiping governance could be harsh, discipline was enforced, dissent could be treated as sin, and that's how idealistic reform can slide into coercion.
What about the claim that they tried to redistribute property?
They had egalitarian rhetoric and plans for land distribution, and in some areas they did disrupt traditional property, but implementation varied, and war conditions often undercut any systematic reform.
So the vision is radical and the reality is messy.
That's a fair summary, and it matters because mess creates factionalism. Once you're in power, different leaders want different things: spiritual authority, military control, personal wealth, revenge, order.
Which leads to internal conflict.
Yes, rivalry inside the Taiping leadership becomes a major failure point. A movement built on divine certainty can fracture when leaders compete over who speaks for God.
And they're also trying to run an enormous war at the same time.
Exactly. Let's talk logistics again. Nanjing is a prize, but it's also a burden. Feeding and supplying a capital in wartime requires stable routes, agricultural control, and administrative capacity.
So if you hold the city but can't secure the countryside, you're sitting on an island.
Right. And the Taiping tried to expand aggressively with campaigns north and west. Some failed, others succeeded temporarily, but the larger pattern is overstretch, holding territory, policing it, and fighting a dynastic army simultaneously.
Meanwhile, the Qing are adapting.
They are. And here's a key analytical point. The Qing state increasingly relies on regional power brokers and local armies to fight the Taiping because central forces prove insufficient.
So the war changes the structure of the state even while it's still happening.
Exactly. The conflict forces decentralization. Local gentry raise militias. Provincial leaders build armies loyal to them. That helps defeat the Taiping, but it also weakens centralized authority later.
That's like curing one disease by giving yourself another.
It's a classic trade-off in crisis governance, and it's one reason this war reshaped China's trajectory beyond the battlefield.
Before we get to the reshaped part, I want the grim anchor, casualties. How does a civil war reach tens of millions without machine guns?
Through a deadly combination: mass armies, scorched earth tactics, famine, disease, displacement, and a willingness on both sides to treat civilians as resources and obstacles.
So the war isn't just soldiers dying, it's society collapsing in war zones.
Exactly. And in the next part, we'll go into how the war escalated, how internal Taiping fractures weakened them, and how the Qing and their allies systematically closed the net around the heavenly capital. The Taiping War becomes catastrophic because it's not one battle. It's a prolonged struggle across heavily populated regions where armies consume the countryside and civilians become the fuel.
Consume the countryside is bleak, but I get it. Armies live off land.
Exactly. Requisition becomes plunder. Plunder creates famine. Famine creates migration and disease. Those secondary effects kill at scale.
So tens of millions is mostly famine and disease, not just combat.
It's a mixture, but yes, indirect deaths are enormous. When fields burn and markets collapse, mortality spikes even without direct violence.
How does the Qing respond once they realize that Taiping are building a rival state?
The Qing mobilize, and they adapt structurally. A key development is the rise of regional armies led by local elites, most famously the Xi'an army under Zheng Gofan.
These aren't the old imperial banner forces.
They're different. They're locally raised, funded through provincial networks, and personally loyal to commanders. That loyalty makes them effective, but it also shifts power away from the center.
So the Qing are basically outsourcing survival to strongmen.
In crisis, yes, and it works tactically because commanders tie the war to local identity and elite survival.
On the Taiping side, what's happening inside the heavenly capital?
Charisma becomes a liability. Hong Shuquan's authority is religious, but governing requires competence. Rival kings develop power bases. Tensions turn into purges. The movement loses unity and drains talent.
So while the Qing are building better armies, the Taiping are fighting each other.
Not constantly, but enough to matter. Internal fracture is a consistent feature of revolutionary states under pressure.
And ideological purity becomes a trap.
Yes, if disagreement becomes heresy, you lose flexibility. Leaders can cloak ambition in religious language, which destabilizes decision-making.
Where do foreign powers fit? This is after the Opium Wars, so foreigners have stakes.
They watch closely. At first, there's curiosity because the Taiping use Christian language and oppose the Qing, but trade and predictability dominate. As the war drags on, foreign interests align with stability and the treaty port economy.
So foreigners pick stability over ideological novelty.
Exactly. That shift feeds another anchor fact. Foreign forces and local armies helped crush it.
But the bulk of the killing is still the war's internal mechanics.
Yes, take the Yangtze Basin, add multiple armies moving through it for years. Villages get punished for suspected aid. Retaliation cycles spread. Civilians are forced into affiliation just to survive.
So neutrality isn't an option.
Exactly. And that makes the war contagious. Every village becomes a potential front line.
How does the Qing close the net around Nanjing?
Persistent campaigns, control of river routes, and siege logic. Regional armies retake territory, cutting Taiping supply lines and isolating the capital.
So controlling waterways is like controlling the bloodstream of the war.
Exactly. In that economy, river transport and grain movement are strategic weapons.
Siege multiplies death.
Starvation, disease, desperation, inside the walls and outside them. Both sides deny resources. The countryside is stripped to feed armies or starve enemies.
This is where the creepiness is bureaucratic, systems that grind human life into numbers.
That's the analytical heart of it. The war is a machine made of institutions, incentives, and fear. It stops when one side loses the capacity to continue.
So what finally breaks the Taiping?
A combination: internal fracture, military pressure, loss of territory, and the consolidation of anti-Taiping forces that coordinate regionally and, at times, with foreign assistance.
So we're heading toward the fall of the heavenly capital.
Yes. Next, we'll walk through that collapse, why it was so destructive, and how the aftermath reshaped the Qing state in ways that mattered long after the Taiping banners were gone. By the early 1860s, the Taiping are increasingly on the defensive. The map that once looked like a rising alternative state starts to shrink.
And the heavenly capital, Nanjing, becomes more isolated.
Exactly. Anti-Taiping forces retake key territory and choke off routes that feed the city. Control of river transport, grain movement, and surrounding farmland becomes decisive.
This is the war turning into a siege logic. Starve the center, collapse the system.
Yes, and the Qing's regional armies, particularly under commanders like Zhang Gufan, build sustained pressure. Their effectiveness comes from organization, funding networks, and the personal loyalty structure we talked about.
Which is a win now and a problem later.
Exactly. But in the moment, it's a tool that works.
Where do foreign forces show up in a practical way? Are we talking about Western troops marching on Nanjing?
Not large national armies in the way you might imagine, but foreign-trained units, foreign officers, and foreign weapons and financing in localized forms. The most famous example is the ever-victorious army, linked to foreign leadership and operating in coordination with Qing-aligned forces around key areas like Shanghai.
So foreigners are defending the trade hubs and helping the Qing suppress the movement that threatens stability.
Exactly. Foreign powers had treaty port interests. A prolonged Taiping victory or continued chaos threatened commerce, so stability aligned with Qing survival.
That's the analytical lesson. Ideology is loud, but trade routes are louder.
Often, yes. And while foreign involvement is not the sole reason for Taiping defeat, it's part of the larger anti-Taiping ecosystem, local armies, provincial elites, and external interests converging.
What happens to Hongshu Quan as the walls close in?
Accounts indicate he becomes more secluded and increasingly reliant on spiritual framing as material conditions deteriorate. Near the end, he dies. Sources debate illness and circumstance, but the key point is that the movement loses its central symbolic figure as the siege tightens.
That's a devastating timing. The prophet dies as the kingdom collapses.
Yes, revolutionary movements often rely on charisma. When the charismatic center fails through death, illness, or loss of credibility, cohesion weakens at the worst moment.
So then the fall of Nanjing is inevitable.
By 1864, yes, anti-Taiping forces breach and take the city. The aftermath is brutal: urban warfare, executions, reprisals, and the devastation that follows years of siege and scarcity.
And on top of that, you have years of earlier devastation already baked into the landscape.
Exactly. The Taiping War is cumulative. It's not a single spike of violence. It's prolonged erosion of the ability to live.
Let's talk about the weird fact list as a chain of causes. Leader claims divine kinship, builds a rival capital, rewrites social rules, war kills tens of millions, and then a coalition crushes it.
That's the arc, and the analytical question is why each step was possible. The divine claim mattered because the state's legitimacy was already shaken. The rival capital mattered because the movement gained enough recruits and territory to govern. The radical rules mattered because they offered moral clarity and threatened elites. The casualty scale mattered because logistics and repression turned the countryside into a killing field. The coalition mattered because the Qing learned to survive by decentralizing and aligning with external interests.
That's the part that feels ominous. The Qing survives, but it doesn't come out whole.
Exactly. Victory comes with structural costs. Regional armies become powerful. Provincial elites gain leverage. The center's monopoly on force weakens.
So crushing the Taiping solves the immediate crisis, but seeds the next crisis.
That's a recurring pattern in state survival. In emergency, states trade long-term cohesion for short-term survival.
And the Taiping themselves, do they vanish instantly after Nanjing falls?
The core collapses, but remnants and related unrest persist. Civil wars don't end like flipping a switch. They leave fighters, grievances, and displaced populations. The social trauma lasts longer than the banners.
Which means how the world changed isn't just political structure, it's people, demographics, economics.
Exactly. And that's why we need to shift from outcome to legacy. What this did to the Qing state, to regional power, to foreign involvement, and to how China's later reform and revolutionary movements understood the possibilities of mass mobilization.
All right, take us into the legacy. If this reshaped China's 19th century trajectory, how?
We'll be right back with part 2.
Now would be a good time to hit those like and follow buttons as well as leave a comment.
We need your help to continue bringing you stories like this one.
Now let's get back to part 2.
The Taiping War reshaped China because it forced the Qing state to change how it governed, how it fought, and how it related to local society and foreign powers.
So even though the Qing wins militarily, the state that wins isn't the same state that started the war.
Exactly. One of the most important changes is decentralization of military power. The Qing increasingly depends on regional armies raised by provincial elites. Those armies are loyal to commanders and local networks.
Which means the center loses its monopoly on violence.
Yes, and that shift has long-term consequences. When you empower regional forces to save the empire, you create new political actors who can later demand autonomy, resources, and influence.
That sounds like a preview of later warlord dynamics.
It's not a straight line, but it is a structural precedent. The state becomes more dependent on negotiated power rather than centralized command.
What about administrative reforms? Does the Qing learn anything about governance from being nearly replaced?
It learns that legitimacy can't be taken for granted. The Qing pressures the Qing to strengthen fiscal systems, shore up local administration, and attempt modernization under the umbrella of survival.
Modernization meaning weapons and industry?
Partly. The self-strengthening movement that follows involves adopting Western military technology, shipbuilding, arsenals, and limited institutional reforms. The Taiping War is not the only cause, but it intensifies the urgency.
Because the war shows that internal collapse is as dangerous as foreign invasion.
Exactly. And it shows that the empire can be threatened by domestic ideology paired with mass mobilization.
Speaking of ideology, what's the legacy of Hong's religious claim? Does it just become a weird footnote?
It becomes a symbol of how foreign ideas can be reinterpreted locally. The Taiping weren't westernized in a simple way. They absorbed fragments of Christianity and recomposed them into a political theology that fit their context.
That's unsettling because it shows how ideas mutate under pressure.
Yes, and it also affects foreign perceptions. Western observers initially hoped the Taiping might be friendly to their religion and interests, then realized the movement was unpredictable and destabilizing.
So foreigners learned to prefer a weakened but familiar Qing over an unknown revolutionary state.
Exactly. That preference shapes later interactions. Foreign powers often want stability that protects trade, even if the stable regime is corrupt or repressive.
What about the demographic and economic scars? Tens of millions dead is not just tragedy, it changes labor, agriculture, everything.
Exactly. Regions are depopulated, farmland is abandoned, cities are damaged, refugee movements alter local economies, tax bases shrink. Rebuilding takes decades.
And trauma becomes political fuel, too.
Yes, societies remember catastrophes. That memory can produce caution, but it can also produce radicalization. People who lost everything may be willing to gamble on another upheaval later.
So the war leaves behind both a weakened state and a population that's seen what mass movements can do.
Exactly. That's another legacy, the demonstration effect. The Taiping show that a charismatic ideology can mobilize huge numbers, seize major cities, and challenge a dynasty.
Even though it fails, it proves it's possible.
Yes, future reformers and revolutionaries could look back and see a precedent for mass political mobilization, for building rival institutions, for contesting legitimacy.
This is where your analytical tone lands. Not just what happened, but what incentives and structures were rewired afterward.
Precisely. And here's a key rewiring. The Qing's reliance on local elites intensifies. In exchange for local support, the state grants more autonomy and tolerates stronger local power structures.
Which can stabilize one region while fragmenting the whole.
Exactly. It's a patchwork survival strategy, effective against a specific threat, corrosive in the long run.
And where does Nanjing fit into memory? A rival capital is a symbolic wound.
Nanjing becomes part of the historical landscape of legitimacy. The fact that a movement held it as a heavenly capital becomes a reminder that the center can be challenged.
So the war changes not only institutions, but imagination, what people believe can happen.
Yes, the imagination shift matters. Once a society sees a dynasty nearly toppled by internal rebellion, the aura of inevitability breaks.
Which means later crises hit a more fragile belief system.
Exactly. And in the final part, we'll connect that to the late Qing reforms, to patterns of foreign involvement, and to why the Taiping War is often described as a turning point in China's 19th century rather than just a strange, bloody episode. When historians call the Taiping War a turning point, they're pointing to three overlapping effects: state structure, social trauma, and the international environment.
Let's take those one by one, because turning point can be a vague phrase.
State structure first. The Qing survives by leaning on provincial power. That creates a more decentralized empire where commanders and local elites hold real coercive capacity.
So even in victory, the center admits it can't do everything alone.
Exactly. That admission becomes a precedent. In later crises, the same pattern repeats. Local forces become essential, which makes reunification of authority harder.
Second effect, social trauma.
Yes, tens of millions dead is not just a statistic. It's demographic collapse in some regions, broken families, depopulated villages, abandoned fields, and a generation shaped by displacement.
And displacement isn't neutral. It rearranges class relationships, land ownership, even local dialect maps.
Exactly. And it makes governance harder. A traumatized society is less predictable and more vulnerable to future shocks, economic, climatic, political.
Third effect, the international environment.
Foreign powers become more deeply entangled. Treaty ports and trade interests lead outsiders to prefer stability. Foreign technology and advisors flow into the Qing-aligned side in ways that foreshadow later patterns of semi-colonial influence.
So foreign forces and local armies helped crush it isn't just a battlefield detail. It's an early example of external interests shaping internal outcomes.
Exactly. It shows how domestic legitimacy struggles can be influenced by global economic pressure and foreign strategic goals.
I want to circle back to the ideological weirdness, because it's easy to treat Hong's claim as pure delusion and move on.
It's safer to treat it as a political technology. Whether or not you believe a claim, you can analyze what it does. It gives a leader sacred authority. It binds followers through moral certainty. It reframes violence as purification.
And it makes compromise impossible because compromise becomes sin.
Exactly. That's why it escalates conflict, and it's why it's analytically important. Movements that fuse politics with absolute moral certainty tend to create total war dynamics.
Which explains why civilians become targets and resources, not protected bystanders.
Yes, in total war logic, civilians feed armies, hide enemies, and symbolize legitimacy. That logic produces massacres, forced relocations, and scorched earth.
Here's the unsettling thought. The Taiping War demonstrates how quickly a society can be turned into a battlefield when institutions fail.
Exactly. It's not a story about ancient chaos. It's a story about governance stress and what happens when legitimacy collapses and alternatives arise with disciplined organization.
So if a listener asks, why should I care about this? The answer is, it explains how states crack.
Yes, it explains the trade-offs states make to survive and how those trade-offs can weaken them later. It also explains how mass movements build power, narrative, discipline, recruitment, and a rival administrative structure.
The rival capital part feels like the purest symbol of that. You don't just rebel, you claim the center.
Exactly. And once you claim the center, the stakes become absolute. That's why the war does not end with a treaty. It ends with collapse and repression.
I keep thinking about the phrase heavenly kingdom. It's so serene, and then the reality is a landscape of famine and bodies.
That dissonance is part of the lesson. Ideals can be sincere and still produce catastrophe when fused to coercion and war.
So the Taiping aren't just villains, and the Qing aren't just heroes.
Correct. This isn't a morality play. It's a system story. The Qing had deep structural problems that made rebellion plausible. The Taiping offered a radical alternative that mobilized millions. The war then created incentives for brutality on every side.
And the aftermath rewired China's future. Decentralized power, reform urgency, and deeper foreign entanglement.
Exactly. That's why it reshaped the 19th century trajectory, not because it was weird, but because it made the empire survive by changing itself, and those changes had consequences.
So the creepiness is in the mechanics. A leader's claim becomes a recruiting engine. A rival capital becomes a legitimacy bomb. Logistics becomes famine. Survival becomes decentralization.
Yes, and if you remember anything from this episode, remember that scale and structure matter more than spectacle. The Taiping War is spectacular, but its lessons are about how systems fail and what survival costs. Thank you for joining us in the rabbit hole today.
If you've got a story that defies explanation or just want to tell us how much this episode affected you, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as Spotify and YouTube.
Down the Rabbit Hole Weird History is brought to you by GX Works.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the parts of history most people would rather forget.
Until then, keep questioning what you know. Here is what we do know. The truth is always waiting just below the surface.
Be sure to like, share, follow, subscribe, and all that stuff to hear more episodes. Leave a comment to let us know what you thought and what you'd like to hear in the future. And we'll see you in the hole.